your email, then you don't have to wait on the emails to come, because sometimes I've heard reports that sometimes they come like 5 minutes later, and then you're ending up late. Instead, just save that link, put it in a calendar item. 2 p.m. every single Wednesday, we'll be here. We would love for you guys to join us as well. These sessions are going to be new playbooks that we teach each and every week. And the idea is we want to give you something that you can take away and you can implement this afternoon. So what I would actually recommend is that not only do you block out the 2 to 3 p.m. time frame, but go ahead and break out and mark that 30 minutes to an hour afterwards as well. And I know that's a big ask, but I promise you, not only are we going to give you something every single week that you can implement right away, we're going to give you something that's going to have results pretty much immediately. We don't do stuff where like, hey, try this out and maybe in a few weeks you might get something. That's not what we're about here at Power Lunch. We call this Masterclass for Real Estate Agent because we want it to be something that you guys can put into action right away. Okay. I don't want this to be one of those training sessions where you're like, good, I've checked off my CE block for the week. I've learned something new, never put it in action, but I've learned something new. And I say that not to point the finger, because I've been there as well, where I'm like, oh, that's such a cool idea. I should implement that sometime. And that sometime never comes. So what I'm actually telling you is do it right after we get off. Okay. Now, today's session, you can probably see on your screen, this is our Bulletproof CMA. CMA, if you've never heard the term before, is comparative market analysis. It's basically a way to do a home valuation. And so we're going to talk about a new way to do a home valuation that is based on statistical analysis and is not the traditional old way that, quite frankly, is very easy to manipulate and not very good. Okay. I would love for you guys to interact. I need to, when I ask questions and stuff like that, just drop your stuff in the chat, raise your hand. We can get you on the video if that's what you want to do. But either way, I want to hear back from you guys, at least to know you're not asleep yet. Okay. So otherwise, relax, get yourself a drink, and we're going to jump into it. So today, the tools that you're going to need, you're only going to need two tools. One is you're going to need your MLS. Okay. To be able to implement this CMA, you're going to need the MLS. You're also going to need the Bulletproof CMA and the calculator. You can access that at bulletproofcma.com. And I had somebody asking me earlier if you've tried to access it recently and all of a sudden you had some issues with it. We were making some improvements to it, and in the process of making those improvements, there were some slight issues. It's back to good as new now. Okay. So in fact, if you want to follow along, go ahead and open that up while you have this webinar on. Okay. We're going to go through 3 lessons. You guys know this is our drill. If you've been to Power Lunch, in fact, I'd love to hear how many of you are first-time Power Lunchers here. Not first time to our webinars in general, but first-time Power Lunchers. These Wednesday sessions. Amanda, well, welcome, Amanda. Thank you for coming. You'll notice a pattern. Elsa, also first-timer. Devin, first-timer. Excellent. We've got a few first-timers. Well, one of the things you'll notice if you continue to join us on Wednesdays is that we like to break it down into 3 easy lessons that you can follow along with. Okay, so the 3 lessons today are, number 1, we're going to talk about why the CMA that you're doing right now, why it stinks, why it's not very accurate, it's very easy to manipulate, and why you need a new CMA methodology. Okay. And I realize that I might step on some toes by saying that, but I'm going to talk you through the math. Okay. I'm going to make my case. And by the way, when I make my case, I would love to hear from you if you think I'm wrong. I'm happy to have the back and forth. I want to have the conversation with you guys. The second lesson that we're gonna talk is I'm going to teach you how to create a 50-point CMA, a statistical analysis in less than 15 minutes. Okay. And then we're going to talk about how to generate multiple CMA requests per week, because what good is a great CMA if you don't ever get the opportunity to do it for anybody. Okay. Now, one of the reasons why we teach this lesson, this Bulletproof CMA, and one of the reasons why we came up with it is because I actually think having an accurate home valuation at your disposal is one of the most important things that you can do as a real estate agent. Okay. This is for buyers and sellers, but being able to accurately price a home is one of those things that, quite frankly, the computers haven't figured out how to do. Right? How many in here, just a quick raise of hands, how many in here love or have seen a Zestimate recently that is like spot on accurate? Where is the CMA at? It's bulletproofcma.com, Sheila. Bulletproofcma.com if you want to utilize the free tool. But we'll get into it here in a minute. Good. I'm getting crickets. That's what I expected to get when I asked that question. The question I asked, for those of you who missed it, was how many of you have encountered a Zestimate that was spot on accurate and that you would absolutely hand over to your clients? And the answer is we just don't see them, right? And that's because, as sophisticated as a lot of what Zillow does is, Zestimates are still terrible. And by the way, I'm going to go ahead and put RPR and Cloud CMA in that same soup. I know all of a sudden, this is where I ruffle some feathers, because agents go, well, I use RPR. That's what my broker told me to use, or I use Cloud CMA. Guess what? That's just that's a Zestimate with a different name on it, and that you get to see a little bit of the back end. That's it. Okay. So again, I know I'm stepping on toes here. But all it is, it's a computer model valuation, right? So without your input, without your ability to use your market knowledge, the reality is market valuations are still a very tough thing for computers to do, computer models, computer algorithms to do, okay? So we're going to talk about how to do it on your own, okay? Sheila says, I do my own with comparisons and it takes an hour at least. Well, we're going to talk about how to do one that's probably way more accurate than yours, and it'll take you about 15 minutes or less. Okay. So I'm going to ask the question, is the old CMA method any good? Okay. Now, when I say the old CMA method, I'm going to assume that most of you are using some version of this. Now, you may have some small differences, but the old CMA version is the one that effectively looks a lot like an appraisal, like an abbreviated appraisal, right? What do they do on appraisals? They draw a big circle around the house, and they say, hey, within a half a mile or 2 miles or whatever arbitrary circle length that they make, we're looking for homes that match this house exactly, right? And then they make adjustments based off of square footage, different finishes, stuff like that, right? This is the typical appraisal report that we've all seen. If you've ever closed a deal before, you've seen this appraisal report, right? It's the one that the banks require. Now, we know, and without even getting into the details, and we're going to get into the details, I'm going to like I said, I'm going to walk you through some of the math. But let me just tell you this. How many of the transactions that you've closed in the last year did the appraisal come in almost on the dot of the contract price? Paul's telling lies in here. He says, I love this estimate. It is always spot on. Sheila says, only one? Okay. Not many. Elsa says, almost always. Okay, and this is going to vary depending on your market. Depends on the appraisal rules and regulations and stuff like that. My experience is that if the home has been priced fairly and the contract price is fair, that generally speaking, appraisers don't have any problem hitting that contract price to make the deal closed, right? Lynn says their job is to get contract value. Well, I would actually argue their job is to protect the bank from making a mistake. So So the reason why I bring this up, and we've all seen this, the reason why I bring this up is our valuation, our old CMA methods are based roughly, loosely off of the typical appraiser. And the appraiser can somehow magically, despite using a seemingly scientific method in valuing the property, they can hit the contract price. That's so strange. So here's what it actually means. It means their valuation method is not all that scientific. And therefore, the abbreviated version of their valuation method is also not very scientific. And the question is why, right? So let's look into it, right? And by the way, this is the CMA method that we've all been taught. We didn't know any better. But after today, you're going to know better. And so you're hopefully going to do better when it comes to valuing the property. Okay. So this is the typical method. And this is like the very generous typical method. Most of the time when agents do the abbreviated version of the appraisal method, they stop here, find 3 to 4 closed comps. But let's say that you're being really thorough. You're also find 3 or 4 active comps, right? You're going to throw out anything you don't like. So if you go, hey, that house doesn't really match, that house is too little, that house is too much. And again, you're more or less going off your gut feeling, right? You're throwing it all out. You also are just drawing a circle around the house, right? You're going into your MLS, you're putting the radius to a certain thing, and you're saying going back 6 months or 3 months or whatever it is that you've decided to find these closed comps, right? Doesn't matter if the houses in this neighborhood across the street from this neighborhood are vastly different types of properties. If we can find comparables, we're going to make it work, right? And then we're going to look at, and this doesn't really exist anymore, but back in the day, does anybody remember the adjustment sheets that would sit in your office? I say back in the day, back in my day, it wasn't even that long ago, but I feel like I'm talking ancient business here. Anybody remember those adjustment sheets where your office would have like some set of adjustments and it would say $800 for granite countertops or minus $2,000 for, carpet flooring instead of wood or whatever. And it would just have a whole list of these various adjustments that you would make for things like having a pool or a shed or various finishes and stuff like that, right? And the reality is there may be some, but it's very hard to believe that adjustment sheet that, again, we all used, we were all taught to use it, is just like standard across the board, no matter the house, no matter the type of granite, didn't matter. It just said, oh, granite, that's a plus 1,200 valuation or whatever, right? Nowadays, this is all built into resources like RPR, Cloud CMA. So those resources are doing the same method, but now we have a tech. Instead of looking at some old piece of paper that sat on the desk in the office, nowadays it's all built into the technology, right? But it's the same method. It's the same unscientific method. And again, all you have to do if you want it to land on a certain number is say, I'm going to use this property instead of this one, because all I have to do is find 3 or 4, right? And maybe you even run it both ways and say, yeah, I like this one better. And by the way, that's what appraisers do. That's how they somehow magically end up on contract price so often, right? unless they smell you wrong, in which case they decide to totally hose your deal, and then they're the enemy. A few years back, I had a refinance completely get torpedoed from an appraiser come from out of town, and he was looking at my property and then comparing the properties across the road, which were like 30% down in value because they were in a different school district, appeal to a different demographic of people, et cetera, and torpedoed my refinance a few years ago. But again, he was using the old method. So he, just by having a few of those comps in there, not having the knowledge, quote unquote, scientifically, he was able to come up with a valuation that was way low. Okay. Now, again, this method is not good. It's not scientific. It's very easy to manipulate and get to say whatever it is that you want it to say, right? Can you guys at least admit to me to that? If you've done a CMA the old way, that you go, yeah, if I want to use this one instead of this. I'm not saying that any of you would try to do this, but it's part of, hey, this is the method. It allows for these changes and this manipulation. And so, that's part of it, right? All right. I don't know why this is not changing. Sorry, guys. Sheila says, it is based on the house I think will work the best with the house I'm comping. Yeah, generally speaking. Yeah, usually we're trying to find 1 or 2 matches at most, and we're really trying to get it to hit those numbers. Okay. Now, again, being generous, total sample size is 8. The margin of error oftentimes can be at plus or minus 30%. The reality is Zestimates. We've already talked Zestimates. We all hate them, because how often do your clients look at Zestimates and go, hey, shouldn't my house be this much? And they think it's like gospel. Zestimates are gospel until we re-educate them, right? The reality is the standard CMA is not any better than the Zestimate. In fact, in some ways it's worse because it's so manipulatable. Whereas at least a Zestimate has a standard algorithm that's applied across the board. All right. So hopefully I've made the case for why your method sucks. So now let's talk about what a better method is. Okay. We call it our Bulletproof CMA. You'll be able to put it together in about 15 minutes. It will be based on 50 data points. So instead of 3 data points or 4 or maybe even 8, if you're being really thorough, you're talking about 50 data points. Now, if you recognize statistically the difference between 3 data points and 50, that changes your margin of error big time. The formula for margin of error is based entirely on data points. So the more data points that you have, the lower your margin of error. Okay. It's also, when you're using that many data points, it's very hard to manipulate it, because if you have 50 data points, even if you threw out 1 or 2 or 5, that still means 45 other data points are being brought in here. Okay. Now I want you to go to the calculator, open this up. This is the one time when I'm going to say, hey, open this up while we're on. In fact, you can minimize this screen and just listen while you're looking at the Bulletproof CMA. This is a tool that we built a few months ago, maybe 5-6 months ago. We built the original version of the tool long ago. It was the spreadsheet. And then we put it online and built it into a standalone tool maybe 5 or 6 months ago. We're really proud of it. We love the way it works. But basically, it's based off of 3 valuation methods, and we're going to have 50 data points within those 3 valuation methods. Now, you're going to have the appreciation adjusted baseline valuation. Okay, we'll talk about what that is here in a minute. You're going to have broad match active comparables, and we're looking for over 12 of these. Okay, now when I say broad match, I don't mean, hey, we're just taking the old valuation method and we're trying to find 12 of them instead of 3. No, broad match means we're a lot looser with what we consider a match, but that's okay. Okay, that's okay. We're going to be tight on the important things, and we're going to be loose on the stuff that doesn't matter so much in terms of valuation. And because we're bringing in lots of data points, the edges get rounded off. And then the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to get at least 36 closed comps. Okay. Now, some of you may be thinking, how in the heck am I going to do that? Again, we're going to use the same broad match criteria. We're just going to go back farther in time. Okay. So the reason why we can do that is because we're going to adjust anything that we go back a year. We're going to adjust it forward with the appreciation rate, the appreciation that's happened during that year. Okay. Any questions so far? All right. So let's talk about these 3 components. First is the adjusted baseline value. The adjusted baseline value can come from 3 places: a recent appraisal, a recent home sale, or a recent tax assessed value. Okay, and some of you are already going, tax assessed value? What? Why would I use that? bear with me here. Okay. So there are areas of the country, Michigan, that's one, where tax assessed values are like, boom, way off. But for the most part, tax assessed values at least get you in the ballpark. They may skew a little bit low, but that's okay, because when we bring in other data points, it will again round off the edges from something that may be a little bit low. We're also going to be adjusting it forward with appreciation. Okay. So in this scenario, the least common of these that we're going to have is a recent appraisal, right? If we're trying to put a home on the market, we probably don't have a recent appraisal. We may have a recent home sale if it's been sold in the last 3 to 5 years. Okay. And then the tax assessed value is probably the most common that we're going to use. And all of you have access to this, your county tax records. You can go see the most recent tax assessed value. And again, you're going to want to know the appreciation rate for your area as well. Now, if you don't know the appreciation rate, you can calculate it using the Bulletproof CMA tool. Okay. Sheila says, yes, it is. Oh, KC Jackson County went wild 2 years ago. Do you mean the tax assessed values went wild? Okay. Yeah, I bring up Michigan as an example because they actually put into law that the tax assessed values cannot be reassessed until the home sells again. So in other words, it's to keep people that have owned their house for a long time to not be, effectively priced out of their own home that they've owned because tax values are going up. So it's not necessarily a terrible law, but what it does is it creates a house that someone's been in for 20 years. The tax assessed value is like a tiny percentage instead of at least in the ballpark of what the home valuation is. Okay. So this is going to be adjusted forward to like today's dollars with the appreciation rate for your area. And this is probably the number one area when agents start to actually perform this Bulletproof CMA. This is the number one area where they get tripped up. Okay. And so first of all, the area that they most get tripped up is appreciation rate, which I know as you say it, all of you are going, oh, appreciation rate, why would I get tripped up there? Well, let's actually talk through what appreciation is. First of all, we're not using the appreciation rate of the subject property. What we're doing is we're using the appreciation rate for the area that the subject property is in. And we're going to assume that the subject property appreciated at roughly the same rate during that time period. Okay. And that's how we're going to bring the tax assessed value forward. So if you're following along in the Bulletproof CMA tool, it's going to ask you to put in some details of the property, what subdivision it's in, the address, beds, baths, square footage, etc. And then it's going to ask you a baseline valuation. Again, it can come from any of those three places. So you could take the tax assessed value. Okay. So again, for the sake of the math today, they don't do math in public, but I'm going to try anyways, but I'm going to do it using real basic numbers. Let's say that a house was assessed at $100,000 in 2020. Okay. That was my tax assessment. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in $100,000. I'm going to put January 1st, 2020 as the date of valuation. And then I'm going to go into the appreciation calculator to calculate what the appreciation for my area is during that time period. So it's going to give me 2 date ranges to look in. I'm going to look at the average home price in the initial date range and the average home price for my area in the second date range. It's going to automatically give you these date ranges. And based on the change in those two average home prices, it's going to calculate a yearly appreciation rate. Okay. It's then going to take that yearly appreciation rate and multiply the number of years it's been since that valuation. So it's been 3 years since that valuation times the yearly appreciation rate over that given time period. And boom, we have an adjusted baseline valuation. Okay, that's component number one. This is only one data point so far. Okay, that is probably the most complicated part of this whole process because everything else is going to be very, very familiar to you and easy, and you can kind of work with it. But the cool part is, and you'll see as we go through this, you still have the ability to make this your own, to use your market knowledge and really be really confident in the valuation that you come up with. The second value component is active comparables. Again, we use broad match comparables. In other words, I don't need an exact match for this subject property. I need a broad match. Okay. So the components that we're looking for when it comes to broad match is I want it to match roughly the square footage. And what I mean by that is I'm going to take a plus or minus 10% of the square footage. So if it's a 2,000 square foot home on the subject property, I'm looking 1,800 to 2,200 square feet. Okay. Then I'm going to try to match beds and baths, and I'm going to try to match the subdivision. Okay. Now, if this subject property is in a tiny subdivision and there's no activity, no sales activity in this tiny subdivision, that's okay, because I can include similar neighborhoods, and they don't even have to be similar neighborhoods right across the street or nearby. I could include a similar neighborhood across town. Okay. Now, again, this part is important because you may have to, depending on your property, include similar neighborhoods. Okay. Now, when you do that broad match comparables, we're looking for active comparables. Now, you may have initially said, well, I used a tax value, and that's probably on the low end, even when you adjust it for appreciation rate. Guess what? When you include actives, it's probably a little bit on the high end, right? Particularly now that it's not so much of a seller's market as it was last year at this time. The reality is active comparables, there's probably a reasonable markdown in your area. That may not have hit your market yet, but generally speaking, we're seeing small markdowns across the country. In other words, when I say markdown, what I mean by that is the sales price is a little bit lower than the list price. We're not seeing like $40,000 over ask anymore. We see it every now and then, but generally speaking. The second thing or the third component is closed comparables. Okay, we're going to use the exact same broad match criteria. So whatever we used in terms of matching neighborhoods for actives, we're going to use the same ones for closed. This time we're looking for 36 plus data points. So we got one data point from baseline valuation. We got 12 data points from active comparables, and we're looking for 37 data points from closed comparables. When we add all those up, guess what that number is? Again, they say don't do math in public, but I think that's 50. Okay, 50-point valuation. So we're going to use the same broad match criteria. Now, instead of only going back 3 months or 6 months or some other arbitrary thing, we're going to go back as far back as we need. Now, one of the things our tool does is it brings forward those older values. So in other words, if you went back 2 years to find the closed comparables, the number of closed comparables that you need, it will adjust it using that appreciation rate that you entered when you went to the adjusted baseline valuation. Okay. Now, some of you, your heads are spinning. You're going, math, I don't like this. Again, I'm explaining the math that happens, but the tool does it all for you. Okay. All you have to do is enter in the values that you find from your MLS. Okay. You should have an understanding of how the math works, but your head should not be spinning from, hey, I'm going to have to use my calculator and this is going to take me hours. Okay. Now, here's the cool part that comes at the end of this. When you finish it, you're going to have a nice, easy PDF report. In fact, one of the things that I haven't even included on this screenshot is you can actually brand this with your contact information, with your company logo and the whole deal. Okay. And then this is something that you could share with your seller. Or if you're working with a buyer and you're trying to do a CMA on a home that they might put an offer in on, you could share this with them as well. Now, one of the things you'll notice in this report is that it gives a range of valuation. It does not say, hey, this is the home price. Okay. This is the list price. It gives a range of valuation. The suggested list price is what you're suggesting within that range. Okay. And that's because home prices are elastic. That's an economic term that means they can change. They can move. It's not like a stock price that's exactly this price. Even stock prices aren't exactly, I guess. But you get the idea. All right. So all of this is great. Hopefully I'm making sense on the math, and maybe you're even convinced, hey, I'm going to try this out. Great. By the way, that's your homework this week, is I want you to do one Bulletproof CMA on a property. If you do that and send it in to me, support at guerrillarealty.com, you got coffee on me. That's my bribe to you. Okay. Now, all of this is great, but if you're not working with any buyers who need a home valuation done because you found the property, or if you're not currently getting ready to do a listing appointment, you may be going, okay, this is nice. Okay. By the way, you can do a Bulletproof CMA on any property. If you want to do it on your own property, fine. Try it out, see what happens. In fact, I'm up for the Pepsi challenge. I want you to try it out, and then I want you to compare it with the old way you did the CMAs. Okay. I want you to compare it with the Zestimate. I want you to compare it with RPR or Cloud CMA or whatever it is that you're using. Okay. I am up for the Pepsi challenge. All right. How to get multiple CMA requests per week? Anybody have any ideas? Anybody currently get multiple CMA requests per week? I'm curious. All right, I'm going to give you 3 things that you can do to get multiple CMA requests per week. So first of all, let's talk about the best source for seller leads. Who knows what it is? Help me out. Paul says, do unsolicited for your database. Yeah, you could absolutely do a CMA for your database. Nick says FSBO. Devin says buyer leads. Linda says buyer leads. Tamara says current clients. I'm going to go with Devin and Linda. I think that the best source for seller leads has no competition. So that would rule out FSBOs, right? Because every FSBO gets 50 other agents trying to call them. We don't want to have to cold call for 4+ hours a day. Now, most FSBO and expired approaches require that. Ours doesn't. We do have a FSBO approach that does not require cold calling for 4+ hours a day. PF says open houses are the best source for seller leads. Maybe so. I've never personally gotten a seller lead from an open house, but if you know how to do it, like, teach us your ways. Okay. The best source for seller leads, you don't want to have to cold call. And if we want to actually have a good source, we need to have an unending supply. And by that, I mean, I know agents all the time that say, I'd love to call FSBOs, but there's only like 10 of them in my market. And on any given week, there might be 1 or 2 extras, right? Right. So all of these bullet points here lead to one place, which is the best source for seller leads is buyer leads. And some of you are going, what? Okay, so let me make the case, right? And any given buyer, this is the pie chart of buyer leads. About 25% of them are first-time home buyers, meaning they don't have a home to sell. They're renting right now, or they're living with mom and dad. Maybe they're not renting. They're living with mom and dad, and they're first-time home buyers, right? Another 20% is going to be the secondary market. So either second homes, investments, stuff like that. Okay. And maybe it's a little bit higher if you're in a vacation type market, you're on the beach, et cetera. It might be higher than this, but these are national numbers. Okay. So that means what's remaining, about 55% of them are home sellers. So about 55% of all buyer leads have a home to sell as well. So what that means is if you can generate enough buyer leads and connect with them and then qualify their ability to be sellers as well, then you have an unending supply of seller leads and CMA requests. but it requires that you qualify them as sellers very early on. Okay. So let's talk through this, what it looks like. Here are the 3 things you can do. First of all, and this is a non-negotiable, this is what I would recommend even if we weren't going for seller leads, even if we weren't going for CMA request, you got to generate a lot of leads. This is true even if you only wanted to work with buyers, by the way. You got to generate lots of buyers because at some level, this is a numbers game. Okay. And I'm actually going to walk you through some of the numbers when it comes to sellers from buyer leads right now. But you got to stack as many playbooks as necessary. Now, if you were to run just one playbook, let's say it's the Craigslist playbook. Okay. And if you're not running it yet, you should be. But let's say you just run one Craigslist and you do it consistently over the course of a month. There's no reason why you can't generate 80 leads per month. Okay. In fact, those are like rookie numbers. Okay. 55% of them will be selling their current home. Again, this is nationally. It might be a little bit less than that, but bear with me here. This is the national numbers. If you're in a beach market or something like that, where that number is 20%. Okay, run the numbers of 20%. Okay, that means 20 of them are seller leads. It still means that's probably still your best source of seller leads. Okay, the second thing that you're going to do is you're going to begin to qualify these leads. Okay, so out of those seller leads that you generate, only about 3/4 of them will be selling locally, statistically speaking. Okay. The other 25% will be relocations. You could always do like relocation referrals, something like that. If you had those CMA requests, depending on your relationship with the buyer. But let's just pretend like we just take those off the table completely. Okay. And we're only talking about those people who are selling locally. Okay. So that leaves us with 33 leads out of 80. Okay. Now we're going to reach about 60% of them. Okay. Meaning 40% of them don't even pick up the phone. So that leaves us with 20 seller leads. Now, how do we know if they're seller leads? Well, we're going to ask them. Okay. So it starts with our bribe call script. Now, if you have not checked out our bribe call playbook, I would highly recommend it. It's inside your account. We also did this on Power Lunch a couple of weeks ago. It's up available at getpowerlunch.com. The replay is if you did not go to the bribe call playbook one that we did a few weeks ago. But what this script does is it basically allows you to connect with these people that you get on the phone. Okay, so that they're not just going, oh, no, thanks, I'm just looking and trying to get you off the phone, right? So that immovable wall we approach with an irresistible bribe. One of those bribes is we get them set up for the automated search because I'm interested in connecting with them as buyers as well. But I also want to know if they have a home to sell. And if they do, the second bribe I'm going to offer is this 50-point CMA. I'm going to talk about how awesome this CMA is, how confident I am in the valuation, how it will stand up to any amount of scrutiny, and it's probably more scientific than an actual appraisal. Okay. Again, the bribe call script is there. So these 20 people that you're going to get a hold of, you're going to apply the bribe call script to all of them. And typically that's going to result, again, these are national statistics. Yours might be a little bit different, in about 9 CMA requests per month. Okay. Now, if you can do 9 CMA requests per month, you may actually do better than this. But what we see is typically about 4 of those ultimately turn into listings. Now, if you're a magician on the phone, maybe you get all 9 of them. I don't know. Okay. But let's just assume you get less than half. That's 4 listings per month. Okay. Now, where does it start? It starts with generating an absolute ton of buyer leads. You got to start with 80 buyer leads. And if you're not doing that, the rest of the numbers don't even matter. Okay. All right. I'm going to leave it at that. Next week, we're going to talk about our listing presentation. That's a little teaser. Your homework for this week is to do 1 Bulletproof CMA. That's it. Just 1. It can be on your own house. If you have a listing appointment coming up, perfect. Do the Bulletproof CMA on it. Compare it with, or you don't even have to do this second part. I'm just suggesting that you can. That's all the homework. Send it in, support@guerrillarealty.com. I will send you a gift card for free coffee immediately back just for doing the homework this week. Okay. That's how much I want to see you actually implement this. Now, the second part of it is I would love for you, and again, this isn't part of your homework, but I would love for you to compare it with whatever your old CMA method was. Maybe you just used RPR. Try it out. See what happens. Okay. Do it both ways. All right. I'm going to open it up for Q&A. I would love for you guys to try to shoot holes in this. And I mean that seriously. Like if you're an expert valuator and you say, Levi, I see this, this, and this problem, let's talk about it. Okay. Ebenezer says, sorry if I missed this question. Is this recorded and available to us? Always, always, always. These Power Lunch sessions are recorded. They go up immediately because they're broadcasted on Facebook. They go up immediately in the Facebook group about 5 or 10 minutes after we get off the session. And then you'll see them after a couple of days at getpowerlunch.com. And that says, thank you for the wonderful training. See you next week. Excellent. Just joined yesterday. Well, welcome, Ebenezer. I promise I won't bite, and I will not try to make you feel bad if you go, hey, why does this work this way? Okay. Linda's working on her house right now. I love it. Is it going to make you want to sell it? Maybe so. Sheila says, please repeat what the value one math is based on. Well, let's look at it. Okay. So let's go back to... All right. Adjusted baseline valuation. It can come from 3 places. Okay. And it can come from a recent appraisal. Not all that common, but sometimes we have one, particularly on expired listings, right? We'll have a recent appraisal. Recent home sale. So if the house is sold within the last 3 to 5 years, you could just use that, or a recent tax assessment. So if it hasn't sold within the last 3 or 5 years, I'd probably recommend the tax assessed value, unless you're in Michigan, in which case, let's talk about it. But that's probably the most common, is from the tax assessed value. When you enter it into the tool, it's going to ask for 2 other things besides the tax assessed value. It's going to ask for that, and then it's going to ask for the date of valuation. In other words, when did they come up with this valuation? Okay. And sometimes we don't have an exact date. So if you just have a year, just put 1/1/2020 or whatever the year is. Okay. The second thing it's going to ask for is the appreciation rate. Now, you may know the appreciation rate for your area. Maybe your MLS puts that out as part of their stats or something like that, in which case you just enter it in right there. But if you don't know your appreciation rate, it's actually pretty easy to calculate it. And the way that you calculate it is you look at some value in the past, the average home value in the past, and the average home value, home price in your area now. You compare those 2 values and you express it as a percentage of the first value. That's your appreciation rate. That's your yearly appreciation rate. And so what the system will do automatically, once you put those into the appreciation calculator, is it will automatically calculate the yearly appreciation rate, and then it will apply that appreciation rate to the tax assessed value, or the home sale value, or the recent appraisal. And it'll bring it forward to 3/15/2023 valuation. Hopefully that explains it. If it doesn't, we can continue talking about it. I will tell you, if you're a little bit confused, if your eyes are crossing at that, this is the number one area where agents have trouble with this valuation method. Is the adjusted baseline. Any other questions? So far, we got several good ones. And feel free, if you feel comfortable, we can get you on the video camera with the microphone. Dima says, is the tool supposed to store past CMAs? Absolutely, it does. Not only does it store past CMAs, but it will store the reports as well. So you can always go back and look at what you did on previous CMAs. Bulletproofcma.com. And by the way, if you haven't used it in a while, if you checked it out and you're like, okay, this seems complicated, and then you went away from it, we've recently made some improvements to it that make it pretty darn cool. Refresh my memory of the tool. Just bulletproofcma.com. Paul says, I will step up on the call. Does that mean you want to get on video and ask your question? Ebony says, I'm going to jump off and get ready for my listings with the CMA tool. All right, Paul, let me find you in here. All right. How's it going, Paul? Can you hear me? We cannot hear you. I need a microphone. You're muted. There you go. Talk? No. You may have to allow the system to use your microphone. I don't know. Like allow the browser when it pops up and says, hey, can you this site use your microphone? You got to say yes. So if you're not sure, if you click on like on the location bar where you would type in a new address, on the far right side of that, there's like a little video camera, and it will tell you what's allowed camera and microphone wise. And it'll actually tell you what microphone it's using and all that stuff. And that's assuming you're using Windows or Chrome, I should say. Yeah, I don't hear you. Any other questions while Paul's getting his stuff sorted out? His microphone and whatnot. Another Paul says, you can do it. Here, I'll show you what I mean by the little, well, I can't show you what I mean because it doesn't have, but basically right here, I don't know if you can see my cursor. No, it doesn't look like you can. Here, let's try this. All right, can you see my cursor now? Maybe. Yeah, so right up here where the location bar is, there'll be like a little video camera icon, and you can click on that to see your all right, so late Paul has a question. He says, my question is with more rural properties. Any adjustments when the data is not so plentiful? So yeah, this is a great question. Rural properties can sometimes be tricky. They can be some of the toughest edge cases that we see, right? Because we don't have a subdivision to farm comparables out of, right? So how the heck do we find comparable properties? And the answer is sometimes I use my market knowledge and I go, hey, well, if this rural property has 5 acres, instead of looking for the same neighborhood, I might look for other properties with, and then I'll put like an acreage range in there. I'm going to let you sort it out while you're not on camera, Paul. But if you want to hit me back when you're ready, happy to get you back on. But, as an example, I had one recently where she had a horse property. And so what she was looking for in her MLS, and she had to do all sorts of various tricks and, whatnot with the MLS data. But She had to do a range of, she did two things. Number one, she did the 8, because this happened to be a newish property, like it had been built within the last 5 years. And then she had to do, so she used the home age to find other comparable properties, as well as a range around the acreage that she was looking for. And then she could find other rural properties that were similar. Now, again, she had to expand that range, and that's okay. The best way that you can do this using your market knowledge is, what you want to do is you want to think about, okay, who is the buyer that would buy my subject property? And I want to find other properties, as many as possible, that buyer would also be interested in. Okay. So if you can visualize that buyer, then it's easier to find those subject properties and how to locate them. But again, edge cases are edge cases. They're going to be tough for any CMA method, right? The trick is, when you have more data points, you can be confident in the valuation even in the edge cases. Sheila says, when you use the calculator for the appreciation rate in the Bulletproof CMA, do I use what it populates in the data fields? Absolutely. Any other questions? We'll have time for maybe one more. And I'm sorry we couldn't get you on, Paul. We may have to do some troubleshooting so we can get you on a future Power Lunch session. All right. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you for all the great interactions. If Paul wants to type out his question, I am more than happy to address it here. I hate that we weren't able to get you on video. You always have great input, great questions, Paul. So I'd be happy to help. I'm sure it would be for the good of the group. But we will plan on being back here next Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. Paul has a challenging rural property. I love edge cases. Well, why don't you do this, Paul? I do think it'd probably be for the good of the group, but maybe we can get on the phone and just email me, support@guerrillarealty.com, and we'll plan on getting on the phone together and talking through it. Maybe doing some brainstorming. Yeah, if you guys have an edge case and you're sort of at a loss for how to use the Bulletproof CMA, I have a good amount of experience using this CMA method on edge cases, so we can at least talk through some of the different brainstorming practices that I typically do when I have some of the edge cases. So, all right, you guys have a great week. We will be back next Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. We'll see you then. In the meantime, send in your Bulletproof CMA. I'd love to give you coffee. Oh, Sheila has one more question. If I have to find one more property, how do I know what properties it used? I wouldn't sweat the one property. If you are one property short, I would just let it be one property short. There is nothing magic about 50 points. Generally speaking, we're trying to get as many data points as possible. And so I would just say that. So if you're at 49, that's okay. All right, guys, have a great week. We'll see you next Wednesday.